recently started playing a lot of Marvel Rivals because one of my friends plays it and he basically convinced me to get into the game. After playing it for about 70 hours at this point, which here I can show you guys about 70 hours at this point, the game has gotten to a point where I've realized role queue probably wouldn't work in the game. And it's very different from Overwatch. Now, I will say both of Overwatch and Marvel Rivals are hero games, but the reason role queue works in Overwatch now is because of mass balancing changes and over the course of years where you basically have players who main one role. Where if you see a guy play tank, he's probably only played tank for a long, long while. Same thing with DPS or support in that game. Where Marvel Rivals isn't like that. Marvel Rivals is a game where I feel like you have to play different strategies for different versions of roles in order to win games. For example, I know a lot of people love the 2-2-2 aspect, right? Two tanks, two DPS, two healers. But this doesn't work always in Rivals because of how the game is laid out. I'll give you guys an example. Let's say 222 was a thing. And if you are playing, let's say, a Magneto, you have a Groot, you have a Mr. Fantastic, a Phoenix, and then you have Cloak and Dagger, and you have Invisible Woman all on the same team. You basically have three tanks, two DPS, and two healers. And if the healers are also doing DPS as well, you just have a significant advantage over the enemy team. So then what's the counter to that? Well, the enemy team has to put out more DPS than what you can heal. Now, obviously, you need to be able to target the healers, but with the combo I was just saying, you should never be able to touch the healers. So that means you have to get rid of the person first guarding the healers, then the healers, then the rest of the team, kind of in that order, right? So on a 2-2-2 split, you would never be able to come up with a team comp that would be able to counter that. So it would just come down to basically a stalemate, is what we call that in other games like a MOBA, right? Where you just are constantly fighting, but there's no actual results, essentially. And at the end of the day, it would come down to one of two things, either just luck or maybe if someone got a really good combo going and eventually ended up wiping out the other team. Now, this isn't saying it could never work in Marvel Rivals, but this is something that I've just seen a lot all over Twitter where people believe that role queue is like the thing that fixes the game, when in reality, the game isn't balanced for 2-2-2. I'm going to give you guys an example that I believe is the best way to put this. So when you play Marvel Rivals, for example, you and everybody who plays the game knows that yes, the DPS are DPS, the healers are healers, the tanks are tanks, but at the end of the day, every single basically like every single healer is also a DPS, but then at the same time every tank is also a DPS as well. There's so much damage being outputted at the same time by everyone. And this is why triple healer is such a massive thing in the game right now, right? It's not saying you need to play triple healer, but sometimes, you know, you are getting cooked. Just 100%. That's how it's going. You are getting cooked because they maybe have triple DPS and your DPS maybe they're not super crazy, so you decide that your team needs triple healer instead of triple DPS. And that is just how it goes. Or let's say you just have a guy who's crazy. Let's say he's playing Phoenix, right? One of the best characters in the entire game. And because they're on Phoenix, they're just wiping the enemy team completely over and over and over again. Or you have someone who is playing Squirrel Girl or Wolverine. Three DPS that are, in my opinion, significantly stronger than just one DPS individually. If you have a insane Wolverine on your team, or even a half decent Wolverine on your team, you're gonna beat out most other teams. Like let's just be honest. So the game isn't really balanced in a way for 222 because some of the DPS in general and some of the tanks in general require a triple stack of something to counter them. For example, the thing. If you're playing against someone who's playing the thing and someone who, let us say, playing Hulk at the same time, I physically don't see how you are beating them out unless they're just really, really bad without using triple DPS. Just physically, I don't see how it is. And then a big portion of this too that is with balancing is Marvel Rivals is currently in a state where the supports are healers, right? Most of the supports, their main job as of the current date right now is to heal the team and basically nothing else. And you will actually see that better supports in higher ranks will will and have also already figured out that you can do more than just heal. For example, Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger can output a lot of damage. She can do a lot in like a short period of time. I was playing her yesterday. I got 53,000 healing and I had like 15k damage. Now 15k isn't something super crazy, of course, but still 15k damage to top on top of whatever your DPS is doing is enough to wipe teams, you know? And that's something that a lot of the community behind Marvel Rivals, I feel like hasn't figured out too much yet. I'm not saying like the top of the line players, I'm saying the mediocre players like me, right? The people that are maybe slightly above average like myself or people that are below me have not started to figure that out because that's something big in Overwatch that it has, right? Is you have supports and all of the supports in the game in Overwatch can heal, but for the most part, they also do a lot of other things. We'll take Baptiste, for example. Baptiste, if you've played Overwatch before, he is kind of like Rocket, essentially, where he has his normal, like, gun, but he can also shoot healing orbs as well to help his team. But Baptiste, on top of that, is more of a support than a overall healer because he has the ability to do damage. He has the ability to make you invincible for a couple seconds. He has the ability to boost your damage. So his kit is more around him actually supporting the team than just spamming heals. Where someone like let's say Invisible Woman, every single Invisible Woman that I've ever seen play this game just heals. They don't even like try to hit targets or something of that sort. And when I've actually seen a couple people that are super super high rank who are like nuts at her and they use her shield on herself, they heal the team at the same time. They're playing her like she's a hit scan character essentially, like they're Hella, but if they had heals. And those players deserve to be super high rank because you can tell that they are thinking of the character in a more support role than just being there. It's the same thing with Jeff, right? I see people hate on Jeff all the time, but Jeff is insanely strong as a support character, right? I think his ult maybe could be reworked a little bit. Maybe instead of him having to go off the map with you, maybe if you're in his ult and when the ult ends, he kind of does one big chomp and it just does significant damage, and you can either get elimed or you'll just take a lot of damage and then get spat out. I think that'd be a good rework to Jeff's ult personally, but like how much damage can Jeff output is something else that I don't think a lot of people think about, right? Is as you're healing your team, if your positioning is good, you should be able to heal your team and basically just put a constant burst of damage on everybody in front of your team at the exact same time. But a lot of people don't think about this, and I think that's why so many like healer mains in this game probably have a harder time of ranking up because Marvel Rivals just hasn't gotten to that point, right? That's what Roll Q did in Overwatch. To kind of bring this back around, that's what Roll Q did in Overwatch. It made it where if you were going to play healer, you had to learn how to play healer and do more than just heal to be useful on the team. If you wanted to play tank, you had to learn how to play tank and actually use your corners, use your walls, and things of that sort. I think that's a large reason why at the end of the day, if you ever watch those videos where it's like, GM or Eternity Marvel Rivals player trying Overwatch for the first time and they're struggling, it's because Overwatch is a completely separate game. Overwatch, its supports are supports, and they do not hold anybody's hand. So you have to be way, way, way better as a default player than what you have to be in Rivals. Now, I will say the skill ceiling in Rivals, in my opinion, is higher than Overwatch with how the difference in the characters feel. I feel like to be really, really good at Marvel Rivals, the skill ceiling is up here. Where the skill ceiling is pretty close, I would say, in Overwatch, but Overwatch requires you to be more individually skilled than in Rivals in almost every single aspect of the game. And you might be asking what rank am I or something like that. Like I said, I have about 70 hours in the game, have not been going super, super crazy, but I am Plat 2. And now I have had the benefit of playing with some of my homies here and there. Not really to rank up, I have gotten this rank basically solo, outside of a couple games here and there. But for the most part, just playing solo, that this is the observations that I've had. How many times I've gotten in a game where with a Rocket Raccoon, for example, I think is probably the best example of a healer not understanding how to play a support, right? Because every single time I play with a Rocket Raccoon, this is what they do. They set down their aura, and then they just hold right click, and that's it. They never press left click. The literally last night I was playing Cloak and Dagger, and I have a rocket next to me, and we're getting dived by a daredevil, and we both have the ability to not only heal each other, but to also do a lot of damage to daredevil. And this rocket refuses to push the left click. Like if he has to push left click, he might as well leave the game. Like that's how much he refuses to. And it's crazy to me that that is at what a level a lot of the community is behind, because in Rivals, I like I said, I think people are really cool. I actually really enjoy the game, but for the most part, people do not want to do what they don't want to do in this game. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle with things like ranking up, for example, right? When you refuse to switch a character when you're getting hardcore counter swap, not saying you can't just be the better person, right, and just be overall better at the game. I mean, we see that with people like Kingsman, who is insane on Magic. So asking him to swap off Magic when he's going 40-3 because they're picking counters for him doesn't make sense. But when you're in gold, plat, diamond, anything anything that's basically below grandmaster and you're not switching, you better be the best player on your team at the end of the game. Like you better be going like 32-1 with 31 final elims or final hits or whatever, you know. And I think that's something that once the community develops more of, role queue could be good. And that's not saying role queue needs to be implemented now, but the thing is, the community's just not ready for it. Just frankly, the community would really struggle with role queue, because then you would get to this point where kind of where Overwatch was for a minute. Not the long queue times. The long queue times are like it is what it is. But you would get to this point where you would have basically what would seemingly be someone throwing the game, or you would face a comp that'd be so strong that role queue would be obsolete. Going back to that the thing I said with like a Groot, a Magneto, and a Mister Fantastic. I think is probably the best example. I think it's Mister Fantastic if I remember correctly. Yeah, Mister Fantastic, because he has an ability that invertibly turns him into like a mini boss for a temporary amount of time. And good Mister Fantastics are better than most tanks in this game. And that might seem crazy to say, but it's true. If you have ever fought a good Mr. Fantastic, he cooks most like tanks in the game, unless the tank is insanely a high skill level. So if you put those three on a team together, you basically have three tanks, two DPS, and two healers. How are you supposed to counter that on 2-2-2? Just my own personal take. Now, I'm sure the better players at this game would be like, oh, this is how I counter, or that's how I would do it. But we shouldn't only base balancing, and this is a firm believer of like every single game. You shouldn't only base balancing off of the maximum, right? Because if you were basing balancing off of the maximum every single time you did a patch or something like that of that sort, you would basically have a terrible game. And this is coming from someone who I was insanely high ranked in a lot of MOBAs. I've been insanely high ranked in a lot of MMOs. I've been insanely high ranked in Rainbow Six Siege, for example. I like top 1% of players in those games, and while I was playing those games, I can successfully say that yes, maybe people would listen to me more because I was higher rank, but at the end of the day, a lot of my takes were based off of the top 1% of players, right? When you go play Siege and you see the same six tactics, hundreds of times on the same map, hundreds and hundreds of times, you get to this point where you're more focused on what you just don't want to deal with than what's actually good for the game, essentially. Especially in Siege. Siege, you'll see that a lot where people will ban a character, for example, that is like the character really does absolutely nothing. They're not going to affect the game. They're not going to do anything for the game. They're not going to make your game significantly harder. They're banning them just for the pure fact that maybe they just don't want to deal with them for a game. And because of that, they will try to nerf the characters, or they do nerf the characters. And that's just a bad way to nerf things in general. And so far, from what I've seen from Rivals, they don't really do that. They do it off of overall community, but there is still that chance that they do base it off the top 1%, which is kind of sad to say. But yeah, that's all I really want to talk about today was just how I don't really think role queue would fit in the game because they need to add more to the game. I think that's the best way I can put it. They need to add more overall support roles. They need to add more like actual tank characters, not just like an off tank or something like that, like an actual guy who's literally just standing there holding the line. I think a good thing for this could be Doctor Doom. It could be White Hulk. I think would be great for that. They could do Red Hulk maybe, to be like more of like a brawler alongside the regular Hulk. I mean, there's so many options in the Marvel universe. They could do Luke Cage. I think Luke Cage would be great. They could literally make it where Luke Cage himself just takes 20% less damage or something like that from projectiles. I think that'd be a great like passive skill he could have. But until the game starts to develop more characters like that actually just have their own passive support system and they kind of are their own little one-man army, I guess, it's just really really hard. And they've already started doing this a little bit, I will say, with like let's say Deadpool, I think is a good example. But he's probably the worst person for like overall balance, in my personal opinion. He if you guys have ever fought a good Deadpool player compared to every other character in the game, I'm sure you guys can think on it just a second and just be like, yeah, he was stuck to me like glue and just healed through the entire thing. And I'm talking about the healer version too, not even the DPS version or the tank version. And I think that's a good example of someone who is starting to more fit into a overall support role than just being I'm a healer, oh I'm a tank, oh I'm a DPS. But I think he's a little bit too powerful for a support role. If you genuinely, if people started learning Deadpool on like a high skill ceiling level, you'd see him in every single game. I think you'd see him and Gambit in probably every single game, just because of the utility that they bring to the team. I mean, you get AoE heals, passive buff heals, shields. You get characters that do significant damage to to the other people. It's basically like you have two extra DPS on your team the entire time that somebody's running those two and they're actually good at those characters. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to rant about today. I don't know. If you guys have any advice for getting better at the game, I'd love to hear it. Obviously, I'm not super high rank. This is just my observation from climbing literally from the bottom to where I am right now. Is a basic observation that I've had after playing 70 hours of the game, and I am playing Overwatch at the exact same time, so it's it's a little bit easier to make the comparisons. I'll say, and anybody who's questioning it, go play Overwatch a little bit. Not saying you got to go get hit GM or something, but just go try it. You might be surprised how big of a difference like the players play. You know, like the amount of cover that you have to use, or a map knowledge, or things of that sort. I think make a huge difference in the two games. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.